This is the parking lot where we spent a lot of time. But before getting to this point, we looked at so many apartments. At least it felt that way. My brother-in-law drove me around looking for apartments. And thank goodness he did, because my anxiety would have been through the roof. I wasn't familiar with the area. And then on top of that, a lot of the roads are narrow. Parking, you have to parallel park most places. And at that point, I really never had to parallel park, so that was not something that I was going to be used to. So, anytime I think of a way to describe the difference between California houses and Rhode Island is the intro to the show Weeds. So if you remember the show Weeds from the early 2000s, the intro song is something like, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes, and they all like, something like that. That is the difference. So there's a lot of tract homes. The homes all look the same pretty much, whereas here, the homes are older, they're really close together. So that was a huge difference. One home in particular had a washer and dryer in the unit, which was uncommon. Most of the units did not have a washer and dryer in the unit. If they did have a washer and dryer, it was in the basement and it was a shared washer and dryer. So this unit had a washer and dryer in the unit, but it was a coin operated washer and dryer. So I was going to have to use coins to do my laundry. And then the landlord would come into the unit to get the quarters. So no, that became a hard no. There was also one apartment in particular where the electrical was a little bit questionable. So when you walked into the multifamily, you walked upstairs and then there was a landing, and on this landing was a dryer, and the dryer had an electrical cord that ran up the wall to the ceiling and around, and then I think it went into an outlet or it ran back into the house. It was so weird. It might have ran downstairs. It was bizarre. So the dryer was outside the unit, and then when you went into the front door, you had to go all the way to the back of the unit, and that's where the washer was. So it was really weird. That was actually an apartment where the carpet it had carpet. A lot of the places had wood floor, which is kind of nice. You just wipe it down, but this one had carpet, and it hadn't even been vacuumed. It was dirty, and we asked about them cleaning, and then they said, oh yeah, we'll probably vacuum it. And you would think that there would be more than that for cleaning. Some basements I went into were just, gross. And they had the washer and dryer in them. They were going to be used and they were just like, ugh. Or it was not even going to be able to be used by the tenant and it was going to be off limits. So a lot of the times I would film it so I could show my husband. I don't think you're gonna like this. Now, I'm sure if we would have had a more stable financial situation, maybe this story would be different. But because we had no jobs and we had to prove that we could afford to live in an apartment, that really limited us. And then on top of that, we had our son, a dog, and a bird. Now, most people might think, you had a kid, who cares? But there were a lot of apartments within our price range where it was stated within the description that no children were allowed, Or I remember going to this one apartment complex, and it was an actual complex, something that I was kind of used to, versus a multifamily situation. And while we were there, that's when they said that they normally do not rent to people that have children. So I recently became licensed in real estate, and I've learned all the exceptions to the fair housing law, because at the time I was thinking, I'm pretty sure they're violating fair housing. Parking, use of the basement, and use of the garage were different across the board. So this is a house that we looked at, and this is the driveway, and the driveway would be shared with both units. So it was a two unit multifamily. We would have rented the second floor and would have had to share this driveway with the tenant on the first floor. Well, we had 2 cars, and we were thinking, oh my goodness, how is this even big enough? What about the tenant on the first floor has 2 cars? That was something that we were not used to whatsoever. We lived in a city where there was not limited parking. I mean, you usually either had parking on the property or there was plenty of street parking. And not street parking where it was really like hard to parallel park. The streets were wide open in a lot of areas, at least from where we were moving. So it was just different. There were a few apartments that we looked at that had a garage, and it was kind of the same situation as the basement. It was not something that the tenant was going to be able to use. The garage was utilized by the landlord. This was the actual drive that sold me on the city that we eventually moved to.
Continue on Dave Parkway for 3/4 of a mile.
Look at that beauty on the right.
This is a little park
Yeah,
with lots of
the
trees.
trees. Oh, beautiful. Look at this road. I cannot believe this is right there next to Whole Foods, right there. We were just at Starbucks, what, like 1.5 minutes ago?
Yeah.
It's weird.
We would usually come here and figure out our game plan for looking at homes in this area. And a lot of times we would get or actually my brother-in-law would get a red velvet cake if it was snowing, and that was like our treat for snow days. And here I am, it's January 16th, and I remember when we were looking for homes, it was January 15th of 2015 that the blizzard started. So it's kind of cool, and it's snowing today, and I'm at the Whole Foods parking lot. So in this area of Cranston, the streets are wider, and I think that's one of the reasons that I liked this area. And plus, there's newer construction as far as businesses, and it was just something that I was used to, so I felt comfortable. Nothing is wrong with the great older buildings. It's so much character, but this is just something that I was used to, and I think that's really why I liked this area. I just felt like it was close to what I was used to at home. There was one apartment that kept coming up on our search for apartments, and it was on Craigslist, but the photos weren't very good. So I thought it was a scam, and my husband really wanted me to look at this apartment. I do remember emailing the landlord. I don't know if I emailed them through Craigslist, but I never got a reply back. Well, my husband was adamant about we should see this apartment. So he got in touch with the landlord and scheduled a time for us to see the apartment. This ended up being the apartment that we moved into. Luckily, she didn't have an issue with our situation, and she was fine with the fact that my husband was going to be possibly having to go back to California to keep working if he didn't find a job here. So other than filling out a credit application, she didn't require any other information, and she accepted our application. The only thing that was different is it looked like a single family home from the outside, but it was actually a 2-unit. And on top of that, it had a driveway to a 2-car garage. So we would just assume, oh, you can use the garage. But I remember asking her about that, and she said it would be $150 a month to rent the garage. And now this was a detached garage, but it would have been in the driveway that we were using, that we'd be able to use to park our cars. And before I could confirm with my husband on whether or not he'd want to rent the garage for an additional $150 a month, the landlord rented it to a contractor. Now, down the road, we learned this was going to be a pain in the butt, because a lot of times we'd come from home from work or want to leave for work, and the contractor was in our driveway loading his van up with stuff from the garage. Also, there was one time, or maybe even multiple times, we found like nails in the driveway. And I think one even caused a flat tire for one of our cars. So that was the only drawback to that. But we were lucky to be able to get this apartment because it was pretty nice. So that was kind of the only thing that was a little bit odd. But the apartment in general was pretty nice. Now, after living in the apartment for some time, that's when we discovered what it's really like to live in a multifamily home. Before I get to that, though, the neighborhood that we ended up finding, it's the Knightsville neighborhood of Cranston. And I don't think I knew it was Knightsville. I just knew, oh, it's in Cranston. So one of the main roads that you drive down to get to this neighborhood, the center line is painted red, white, and green. So being from Southern California, I assumed it's the colors of the Mexican flag. And because in California, you'd see the Mexican flag everywhere. So I told my husband, I was like, I think we're moving into Mexican neighborhood. But it was not until we lived in the apartment for a few months that we found out that the neighborhood is an Italian neighborhood. It's one of the largest in the state. And every summer they have an Italian Catholic event, and that's the reason the center line is painted red, white, and green. In the summer, we met our neighbor, Frank. So he was born in the house next door to his house, which was the original farmhouse. And his parents subdivided the land for their children to build their homes on. So 3 of the siblings built homes on the land that they subdivided. So he had lived in the neighborhood his whole life, and he had so much knowledge on the history of the neighborhood and living in Cranston, and he had the best stories. He also was a great gardener, and he shared his produce from his garden with us and the other neighbors. Not only did he share his knowledge and his produce, he was one of the reasons we were able to buy the house we live in now.